Hey, Internet friends. I hope everyone is having a great day and is healthy and happy and just generally doing good. A lot has been happening, so we're going to cover a wide range of topics in this week's wrap up, ranging from the latest footage coming out of China, Elon Musk's bedside table, some notes on Balenciaga, and even the recent trend in crypto billionaire deaths. If you like these wrap up videos, let me know. They're more relaxed than my other videos, and if you like them, I'll do more of them.
I think they're getting ready to microchip all of us.
Elon says that people are in effect already cyborgs because they have a tertiary digital layer thanks to phones, computers, and applications. Elon said that with a direct neural interface, we can improve the bandwidth between your cortex and your digital tertiary layer by many orders of magnitude.
So for the first two applications we're going to aim for in humans are restoring vision. I think this is notable in that even if someone has never had vision ever, like they were born blind, we believe we can still restore vision.
We're going to start with Elon Musk. Video requests for basically what the media won't tell you about Elon Musk is my #1 most requested video. And who can blame y'all? Because if there is one thing we have on this channel, it's trust issues. I'm not an Elon hater. I'm not an Elon lover. I've just got my popcorn out and I'm watching the show. Is Elon the champion of free speech, or is he gonna put brain chips in all our heads while charging us $8 for a blue check mark? I suppose it doesn't have to be or, it could be and. You know, he could accomplish many things at once. The goals are always multifaceted and hardly ever black and white. But I'm going to shut up with speculating and get right down to our schizo-esoteric analysis of his bedside table. Let me bring it up on the screen. Okay, all right, here it is, the bedside table. We've got 4 caffeine-free Diet Cokes, just raw dogging it on the bedside table, no coasters. A glass bottle of water, 2 guns, some patriotic memorabilia of Washington crossing the Delaware, even though Elon is from South Africa, and a little stack of books in the back right corner. If you enhance the red one, apparently it's entitled The Rules of Civility by George Washington, and some have speculated that the bottom one is the Constitution. I showed my husband this picture, and my husband, he doesn't follow Elon. He is not chronically on the internet like me. And, but when he is watching online stuff, he's watching like gun and excavator videos and analyzing the silver market. So he immediately pointed out that neither of these guns pictured here are real right off the bat. The black gun has no trigger and the bullets are square. It's a prop from the video game Deus Ex Machina, and Deus Ex Machina is a plot device in which a surprise savior arrives to solve what looks to be an impossible situation. And a lot of people pointed this out. We can't forget about the little doodad in the left-hand corner. It's the Vara, a legendary and ritual weapon. I'm reading my Wikipedia notes. Symbolizing the properties of a diamond. It's related to the word for diamond and appears to be similar to the thunderbolt the thunderbolt weapon that Zeus carries. If we continue reading here, a thunderbolt weapon, it destroys both internal and external enemies. So when we take that context and apply it to Twitter, it's very interesting, don't you think, with all the online discourse, free speech, essentially censoring the internet and what you can say, what you can't say. Everyone's saying the entire picture is a puzzle, a message, a cipher of his bedside table, whatever. You can travel down the rabbit hole or you can backfill the rabbit hole, whichever you want. Choose your own adventure. I personally like Drew's account on Twitter when analyzing Elon Musk as a technocrat. He always provides the receipts, which I like, I appreciate. Here's one, I brought it up here. Elon's grandfather was kicked out of Canada for being the leader of the Technocracy Party. Nazi/NASA scientist von Braun's Mars 1953 novel had a leader entitled Elon. See, I didn't know any of that. Here's Elon with the New World Order jacket and the Devil's Champion Halloween costume he's been pictured in. Drew's tweet says he's on board with just about every objective of the World Economic Forum. If you want to read more, I'm just going to link Drew's Elon threads down below. Moving on, China. Let's talk about China. Everyone knows that China owns TikTok, and every time I log on to TikTok and look at my For You page, which is curated content based on my own personal interests, I see nonstop footage of China's quarantine camps. Apparently, right now in China, they're locking down again due to COVID. And people are protesting, and their government is treating the protesters very harshly. And the United States government is condemning the way China is handling the protesters, even though it was revealed that the United States wanted Canada to end the trucker protests, and then they villainized us when people said the lockdowns were medical tyranny. But I digress.
不能打人，打啥人呢？警察打人们！两个打了两个，两个。哎呀，打完了！我操，干起来了啊！我告诉你。
新年快乐！你真棒 ！Hello， 加油！加油！加油！
Do you remember this? I remember in late 2019, early 2020, there were all these videos circulating on the internet of Chinese people dropping dead in the streets because of a mystery illness. And they were, like spraying the streets, sanitizing the streets, and sealing people into their apartments for quarantine, and even killing cats and dogs because they believed that the illness was spread through animals. It was totally horrible, and the effect was that people who watched the videos were really scared and wondering what illness it was. And then, of course, in March, the United States essentially shut down for 2 weeks to slow the spread, and those 2 weeks went on forever, and we're still dealing with the aftermath. So I can't even post a video about Sam Bankman-Fried on TikTok without getting punished. My account right now is in limbo, but Chinese-owned TikTok will allow videos of quarantine camps and mistreatment of Chinese citizens to get millions of views on their app. Why are they allowing us to see this footage? What is the end game? I asked on Twitter, and here's what y'all said. Tahini said, "It's a cover for bank runs. Their economy is falling apart." Sarah said, "Here's what's not confusing. Organized chaos is in play. Who's behind it is basically the question. They like the chaos, don't they?" Coolio said, "It's a distraction from something worse." Liberty Girl VA said, "When I heard that they were holding up white paper at the protest and suddenly calling it a white revolution, all I could think of was the Soros color revolution. I hope the people prevail, but it's going to be ugly." Callum said, and this was my favorite comment, "Pre-programming, getting the masses' psychology prepared for when it happens to them. Plus, like most media, it's just designed to bombard you with low energy and steal your loosh and put you in a state of fear to be fed off." I'm going to roll my video on China that I did a few years ago. I think we already have a one world government, and China is, of course, part of it with the contracts for essentially being the manufacturer for the entire world. Like I said, this video is from a few years ago. Maybe I was too easy on them in hindsight, but we'll roll it anyway. Hey internet friends! With China being one of the ancient civilizations along with Babylon, Maya, and Egypt, its history is riddled with the rise and fall of competing powers, strict adherence to the ways of old, marked by revolution and revolt to bring in the new, and recently, a century of shame and humiliation. To understand what's going on with China right now, we must connect the past to the present. To vastly oversimplify and summarize several millennia of Chinese history, Imperial China was once subject to the dynastic cycle. One dynasty fell and was replaced by another, time after time, with a society and culture shaped by Confucianism, under which moral behavior was celebrated. The philosophy of Confucius served as the basis for creating a functioning society. Upright moral behavior exhibited by both the government and the average citizen provided a sense of order that was enhanced by a person knowing his or her own place in a series of hierarchical relationships, and acting accordingly between government and society, and even between individual family members, particularly between father and son. Confucianism placed emphasis on mutual respect, and if this principle was effectively implemented within the home or even between the emperor and his country, then society would be successful. And for a time, China was successful as a leading civilization and dominant global economic superpower. Well, until British imperialism rocked China, which brings us to the 19th century, a century that brought about political and social change globally. Western merchants set their sights on China, and what made China such a desirable trade partner was its trade range, innovation, production capabilities, and large commercial ships. However, China wasn't too keen on the Western sphere of influence, and they were wary of these foreign merchants. Thus, they limited trade to certain ports, and traders weren't allowed to step foot in the empire unless in the designated area. All these rules fueled resentment in the barren hearts of those who saw great potential for profit doing trade deals with China. More specifically, it fueled resentment within a certain empire who desperately needed those trade deals to remedy the financial burden of starting all those pesky wars. So Great Britain got a little creative. Well, that's putting it kindly. They started what we now know as the Opium Wars with China, during which the British grew poppies in India, turned those poppies into opium, and sold that opium to the Chinese to both profit and get the Chinese addicted to opium so they would buy more. Opium was illegal in China during that time, but that didn't stop shady merchants from selling those drugs on the black market. China responded by attempting to completely remove the opium from their country by burning it, but that didn't really work, so eventually war broke out, and it didn't end so well for the Chinese. Wait, a government promoting illegal trade and flooding a society with addictive drugs? All to profit and subvert a threat to the empire? Who's ever heard of such a thing? If we examine history as a whole, we'd notice several patterns emerge, one of which being the strong targeting perceived weakness, especially if that weakness possesses something the strong desires. Doesn't matter if we're talking Rome, Japan, or Great Britain as blanket statement imperialists. To rule the world, or at least attempt to, aggressive strength must be exerted. And in the great jungle of greed, bloodlust, and intoxicating power trips, there are predators and there are prey. China's century of shame and humiliation began with the Opium Wars, but things were about to get a whole lot worse before they got better. The aftermath of the Opium Wars resulted in more trade ports opening for foreigners and merchants gaining rights to travel within China, which is how the infamous Rothschild banking family secured their spot there, along with the notorious Rockefeller family with their Standard Oil business. Both families now are heralded as philanthropists. A fragmented and war-torn country meant the spoils of war were up for grabs. During the Boxer Rebellion at the turn of the century, China attempted once more to get the foreign invaders out of their country. The once united China dissolved into regions that became states ruled by warlords. And the tried and true divide and conquer tactics of the enemy became the kiss of death for the ancient imperial dynasty, and gave way to what we now know as the modern communist state. Following the Boxer Rebellion, the former economic powerhouse went into a period of decline, with a suffering peasant class and no clear leadership, creating the perfect opportunity for a new order to emerge. At odds with each other were the nationalist and communist parties of China. The communist side was funded largely by the same folks who funded the Bolshevik Revolution, all sides of the world wars, and even the wars taking place today. But while the entire world was at war during the 20th century, not only was China battling it out with invading Japanese imperialists, but the nationalist and communist parties were feuding amongst themselves too, not trusting each other while fighting their common enemy. A changing of the guard occurred during the 6,000-mile trek of Chinese communists that secured them as the governing system and Mao Zedong as their leader. This was known as the Long March, which harnessed the frustration and enthusiasm of young Chinese to accomplish their goals and push their agenda. The agenda of which was driving imperialism out of China. The People's Republic of China has been ruled by the Communist Party since 1949. Communism is a socioeconomic structure, and political ideology that promotes the establishment of an egalitarian, classless, and stateless society, all based on common ownership. And essentially, there is no private property under communism. One of the first things Mao did was take the farms of the wealthy farmers and redistributed that land for communal farming, in what was known as the Great Leap Forward. But unfortunately, it was a great leap forward into famine, as many millions of Chinese peasants starved to death as a result. Despite all that, Mao is still praised by the Chinese government for reunifying China, modernizing the country, and lifting millions out of poverty, though millions suffered and died. What rarely ever gets mentioned is who Mao really was, and with whom he was connected. Hold on to your butts, things are about to get interesting. Remember how we touched on the Opium Wars? A company by the name of Russell & Company was the largest American trading house in China before, during, and after the Opium Wars. The founder was a man by the name of Samuel Russell, cousin of William Russell, an infamous founder of Skull and Bones at Yale University, a secret society and fraternity whose skeletal hand has extended to every corner of the world to recruit global leaders. In 1903, Yale established a number of schools and hospitals throughout China. And guess who was a student there? Commie Mao. Coincidence? Well, let's see if we can establish a pattern of bonesmen in connection with communist China. George H.W. Bush, who comes from a banking family who funded the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, by the way, followed the family tradition and was a bonesman at Yale. He was also the first U.S. diplomat to the People's Republic of China in 1973. Meanwhile, Yale in China was managed by bonesman Reuben Holden, husband of Bush's cousin. When Bush returned home, he was appointed as head of the CIA, later becoming president of the United States, securing his own Bush dynasty. If you think about it, wherever the bonesmen go, wherever they target, death follows. The Gulf War, the war on terrorism, the war in Afghanistan, just to name a few bonesman endeavors. The CIA has been in China for quite some time, and over the course of decades has repeatedly stated that China's growing economy is a threat to the United States. After Mao's death, a struggle for power occurred, but ultimately a leader who was friendly with the West was installed and established diplomatic relations with the United States in 1978. While Mao ensured China's sovereignty by enforcing an autocratic socialist system, those who ruled after him focused on market-oriented economic development. China's open-door policy opened the country to foreign investors, which allowed a sprinkling of capitalism to dust over the communist country. And it's important to remember that despite that dusting of capitalism, the governing body was still communist, as exemplified in 1979, when China imposed its one-child policy on the basis of population control. In the summer of 1989, the West got a full view of communism at work. During the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, the global rift between the East and the West was reignited, and a very public changing of the guard occurred. China's general secretary was forced to resign in 1987, and demonstrators gathered in the square for weeks. Western journalists were also conveniently present, and they documented this alleged massacre with a series of photographs and witness accounts, stating that the party leaders sent their troops to open fire on protesters. The Western media reported these unarmed protesters were promoting democracy and were massacred because of it, though the official death toll was never released. Does that sound like a recent series of protests? A certain spring in Arabia, maybe? The Chinese government had a very different recollection of events, citing armed protesters who were voicing frustration over the economy, not begging for democracy, and they were attacking the military presence in the surrounding area. The Chinese government stated that the majority of the casualties were soldiers, not civilians. Years later, CBS News correspondent Richard Roth, who was on the scene at Tiananmen Square in 1989, said, "We saw no bodies, injured people, ambulances, or medical personnel. In short, nothing to even suggest, let alone prove, that a massacre had recently occurred in that place." So what actually happened during this attempt of political revolution at Tiananmen Square? Did a massacre occur? Or did students led by CIA-trained agent provocateurs protest for weeks, their frustration eventually turning violent? Regardless of what actually happened there, the effects were the same. The violence portrayed and relayed on the global stage drew international outcry. Some of the top Communist Party leaders were forced to step down. Freedom of press and freedom of speech was even more suppressed than before. Within a year, the Soviet Union fell, and the world waited for China's communist regime to fall too. Only it didn't. Between Tiananmen Square and now, China became the second largest economy in the world, being the world's largest manufacturer and exporter of goods. According to one study, imports from China by Walmart, the world's largest retailer and biggest importer, eliminated or displaced over 400,000 jobs in the United States between 2001 and 2013. As of 2018, China owns over $1 trillion of US debt, though the Federal Reserve owns double that, making the Federal Reserve the largest creditor in the world. Though recently there's been a trend of China unloading its bonds. Maybe they decided that US debt was a bad investment. The alternative media has praised China for standing up to the global world order by asserting itself on trade deals and establishing itself as a global force in investments, while simultaneously shielding their population from outside influence, like banning Justin Bieber from China, censoring weaponized pornography, and establishing re-education camps for Muslim extremists. But the mainstream media paints a very dystopian portrait of China, one of rampant internet censorship, worrisome social credit scores like that of the Black Mirror show, along with an alarming amount of cameras and artificial intelligence for its surveillance state, tough crackdowns on public dissidents against the authoritarian government. Not to mention a massive DNA biobank with data on any and every Chinese citizen perceived as a threat, a general lack of regard for human life, and a growing sense of hostility between China and the West, as suggested by recent events like trade wars, tariffs, rampant espionage, as well as sonic attacks on US diplomats that mirror the attacks that occurred in Cuba of last year. As I'm always saying on this channel, while it's interesting to analyze news coverage across mainstream and alternative media, I'm more interested in the information that's being suppressed rather than propagated. Recently, China announced its Petro-yuan to rival the petrodollar. While the petrodollar is the standard currency for oil-related business globally, the actual US Federal Reserve dollar is a tangible representation of all the debt the US has incurred as a country, backed by our confidence to exchange it for goods and services. However, China's Petro-yuan is backed in gold. China has established trading relationships with its allies like Russia, and the supplier of endless oil, Iran, which I am sure British Petroleum is pretty salty about, as they were in Iran for some time but got the boot. The implications of this Petro-yuan could have detrimental effects on the US economy, and the multifaceted threat of a gold-backed Petro-yuan was made even more complicated with the proposed European pipeline. One proposed pipeline being US-backed and the other Russian-backed. Both of the pipelines running straight through war-torn Syria, where foreign infiltrators are currently battling it out. Could an oil war be one of the motives for destabilizing Syria, with the continued war on terrorism serving as the never-ending excuse? If we look to the past, Saddam Hussein proposed selling Iraqi oil in euros instead of the petrodollar in 2000. And years later, Iraq was invaded on the false pretense of weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi proposed selling Libyan oil in gold-backed dinars, and encouraged others to do the same. And of course, he was overthrown and murdered in the street shortly thereafter. So, looking to the future, how will China fare in their gold-driven monetary revolution? Will they entice other countries to join in their parade away from the dollar? Or will they suffer the same fate as those who attempted before them? What do you think, internet friends? Is China fighting the New World Order by taking a swing at the Federal Reserve? Is China forging their own world order, separate from the pack? Or is China a testing ground for the brave new world of 1984, with an infinite amount of distractions and surveillance cameras? Let me know. I always look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye! Did you know that when you put Balenciaga into Google Translate, it says Baal is the king? So that whole brand translates to Baal is the king. Baal is the god worshipped in many ancient Middle Eastern communities, especially among the Canaanites, who apparently, thank you Wikipedia, considered him a fertility deity and one of the most important gods in the pantheon. Pretty interesting given the context of all the Balenciaga news, where they had posted on their Instagram photos of children holding teddy bears in bondage, and in the background of one of their pictures was legislation on child porn. Maybe I'll do a whole wrap-up video on just Balenciaga. There's too much to cover right now, but I saw Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson's daughter, tweet the Ball Google Translate thing, and it reminded me of the COVID Google Translate that everyone was doing in early March 2020. Finally, we arrive at the topic I chose for my main video this week, which is something strange is going on with cryptocurrency billionaires, and that something is that they're all dying this month. Pretty interesting in light of all of the FTX news exposing how governments were working alongside cryptocurrency exchanges like Sam Bankman-Fried's exchange, and he was essentially using customers' money to give to U.S. politicians. He's still walking around as a free man, by the way, doing talks and insisting he's innocent. Much better men have gone to prison for much less. We'll end this wrap up with this week's video to get you updated on all the cryptocurrency and CBDC news. As always, internet friends, thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting me on Patreon. Have a great weekend. Bye. Hey, internet friends. With all that's happening in the world, I wanted to report on something so it wouldn't get buried. No pun intended. Basically, it's a bad time to be a cryptocurrency billionaire, and something really strange is going on. In previous videos, we covered the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried's FTX empire and whether it was an organic happenstance or a controlled demolition. And we also covered the rise of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. But today I'm talking about the handful of crypto billionaires who have passed in the last few years, 3 of them just this month, the coverage of which has been overshadowed by the FTX story. And I want to know, are we witnessing an organic, genuine string of fatal accidents? Just a coincidence, or is it something more? And if it's something more, what does it mean? Why should anyone care? How will you be affected? We're going to move backwards on this timeline, starting at the most recent incident. It was announced this week that 53-year-old Russian billionaire Vyacheslav Tiran, the co-founder of Libertex, a cryptocurrency exchange like FTX, had passed alongside his 35-year-old pilot after Tiran's helicopter crashed near Monaco. It was reported that another unidentified passenger was supposed to join him on the flight but canceled last minute. Coverage of this story has been limited, yet very interesting to me because Ukrainian press has alleged that Tiran was a spy. But so far, I've yet to see these claims substantiated. No citations, no proof, no nothing in these reports where they allege that Tiran was linked to the Russian SVR, Foreign Espionage Agency, and was responsible for, quote, laundering Russian funds through a system of cryptocurrency operations, end quote. But I mean, hey, it could be true. Tiran's net worth was around $20 billion. What happens to all the crypto funds in his wallet? Who has the key? Can the funds be traced post-mortem? This is a blanket question I have for all the crypto billionaires who have recently passed. On Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022, 30-year-old Tian Kulinder, otherwise known as TT, co-founder of the Hong Kong-based digital asset company, the Amber Group, passed suddenly in his sleep. TT had a net worth of around $3 billion, and he previously worked at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs before founding Amber Group. TT reportedly launched Amber Group along with a group of pals from Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. I have to wonder, what 30-year-old just dies suddenly in their sleep? On October 28, 2022, cryptocurrency millionaire 29-year-old Nikolai Mushigan drowned on a Puerto Rican beach just hours after tweeting that Mossad and the CIA were trying to murder him. Nikolai was co-founder of cryptocurrency lending platform MakerDAO and the decentralized DAI stablecoin. Nikolai's last tweet was published just a few hours before his drowning, where he was found fully clothed with his wallet on him. And his tweet suggested that the CIA and Mossad were going to blackmail him, and he hinted that the CIA was going to make it seem like his passing was by his own hand. The tweet reads, quote, CIA and Mossad and Peto Elite are running some kind of sex trafficking entrapment blackmail ring out of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean islands. They're going to frame me with a laptop planted by my ex-girlfriend who was a spy. They will torture me to death, end quote. Since Nikolai's passing, news articles have published an anonymous source who claimed that the crypto developer was a loner and he lived alone with his dog. And the source also stated that after Nikolai and his girlfriend broke up, he was convinced she was a spy. These 3 incidents in the last month were the ones I wanted to focus on, but they aren't the only incidents and they aren't the only fatal accidents. Billionaire banking heir to Carnegie Mellon and Drexel families of the Bank of New York Mellon and Drexel Burnham Lambert, 54-year-old Matthew Mellon passed while attending a rehab center in Mexico back in 2018. Which is notable because even though Mellon was old banking money, obviously, he made his personal fortune in cryptocurrency. The vast majority of his assets were locked up in a cryptocurrency known as XRP, which is managed by the company Ripple. And if you follow cryptocurrency news, you know that Ripple is currently tied up in a lawsuit with crooked Gary Gensler's SEC. If you remember, Gary Gensler is barely 1 degree separated from Sam Bankman-Fried. Like Mellon, 30-year-old Gerald Cotton passed in 2018 without sharing the keys to his crypto wallets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His death prompted the Netflix documentary Trust No One. Cotton was the founder of the bankrupt cryptocurrency firm Quadriga CX, and he passed while on his honeymoon in India with his wife, having signed a will just 9 days before, fueling rumors that Cotton may still be alive and living off the embezzled funds. On his honeymoon in India, Cotton complained that his stomach was hurting. He went to the hospital and was diagnosed with traveler's diarrhea. 1 day later, he passed, and no autopsy was ever performed. Of course, the Terran, TT, and Nikolai incidents all occurred in the same month as the FTX collapse, in which a crypto exchange, which was ran out of the Bahamas, took customers' money and invested it in unknown assets. Then an incredibly damning write-up about the company was published, only for FTX's main competitor, the CEO of Binance, while he decided to liquidate hundreds of millions of dollars worth of FTX's utility token, and that signaled to other crypto investors to do the same. But when FTX's customers went to pull their money out of the exchange, there was no money, robbing them of billions of dollars, which made legislators call for further regulation of cryptocurrency. Just announced 2 weeks ago, the New York Federal Reserve has launched their digital dollar pilot program with the big banks, and the National Bank of Ukraine has released their draft for design options for their own CBDC. The Bank of Japan is experimenting with their own CBDC, the digital yen, in tandem with the country's mega banks. And the list goes on of all these countries announcing this in the last month, from the CBDC adoption in Africa to India's e-rupee. But the common denominator is that it's the Federal Reserve Central Bank's digital currency, unlike what we have right now, the current privatized industry. The central banks, the Federal Reserve, will have full control of the digital dollar, able to trace every transaction. But what happens when you make the banks mad, like what we're seeing now with the banks refusing to do business with who they disagree with politically? Unlike cash or silver or gold, I can't go bury my hoard in the backyard for a rainy day. With a click of a button, my entire life savings can be deleted if my social credit score isn't high enough. The funds withheld from me and my family. Or my social credit score can be influenced by how I spend those funds that I have, because every transaction is traced and analyzed for the fullest expression of control. So that's why I'm hyper-fixated on this subject. That's why I keep harping on this, because the average person will feel the ramifications of what's happening, of what's playing out on the world stage, and people still won't get it. We already have a one-world government, a debt slave system, and it was implemented in our country by the creature at Jekyll Island in 1913. The Federal Reserve banking system. We're simply witnessing their next phase of control. But they can't operate without widespread ignorance, useful idiots, and consent. I really can only speculate about what's going on with these crypto billionaires in their untimely passing, if they really even died at all or went into hiding instead. So I turned the question over to you on Twitter. I asked, theories on why crypto billionaires are dying, being killed recently. Welcome to the Tribulation said, these billionaires were used to normalize digital currency and they became successful. The World Economic Forum doesn't want any competition. Everyone needs to be ushered onto the CBDC train with no other options available. Chahuapov said, centralization. FTX was needed as the big bad boogeyman. Banks will say, your money is safe with us, and then go bust themselves. After that, central bank digital currencies will be introduced to fight the corruption, which will then be hijacked to become the new empire of money. Liberty Heretic said that the World Economic Forum and intelligence agencies want a monopoly on crypto going forward, so it can be used as global currency linked to social credit system. They can't do that with strong competition who aren't part of the agenda. And finally, Goose Girl said, remember how all those millionaires died on the Titanic right before they set up the Federal Reserve? Yeah, basically the families who would have stood in the way of the creation of the Federal Reserve just happened to be the families who went down with the Titanic. What do you know? What a coincidence. What do you think, internet friends? Is something strange going on with these crypto billionaires? I want to know your thoughts. You know, I always enjoy reading your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye.